Chapter 6. Have a Nice Day. The snow was falling so fast we were afraid Miss Hutter might be there, bearing the outside door. If she was, we were going to argue. There was a lot to talk about, and inside recess meant staying in the room. Staying in the room meant being overheard. Lockers slammed all around, and kids were covering their mouths as they laughed, like they were telling dirty jokes. I could hear them saying "sweat land" and "stink llama," and then laughing some more. Nick and I zipped our coats as we ran. But even then we just tied with Molly and Lisa getting to the door. Miss Hutter was there, all right. But all she said as she watched the four of us forge out into the blizzard was, "Remember, boys, no snowballs." As though no girl ever threw a snowball in her whole life. Outside the wind was whirling so hard that in some places you could see the blacktop, and in others the drifts were way up over the tops of our hiking boots, almost to our knees. "What I want to know is, how are you keeping score?" Nick asked Molly. "Not that it matters since points don't count, but I'd say we're way ahead of you." Molly started drawing lines in the snow with the toe of her boot. "I'm only counting important things, like our switching names and the contact lens caper and my changing Svetlana's message on the board." She chewed on her mitten a minute. "I gave you one for leaving the room, and one for Marshall's Japanese, even though that barely counted." "What about the crossing guard story?" I asked. "Excuse us," Lisa said, "but we've got like a lot to talk about." And she and Molly headed toward the jet slide. It's this big swept wing slide that on warm days lots of kids can go down at once. In winter it makes a perfect shelter from the wind. Every single girl was huddled under it to talk about the sub. The dry snow was not good for packing, but it would have been great to scoop up by the armful and heave a batch under the jet slide. You couldn't miss, the girls were so neatly packaged in one space. But even things like snowballs were strictly forbidden. For throwing snow, Miss Hutter sent you home, and if your mom worked like mine does, she called her at work, and then your mom really let you have it when she got home. Then even if it was sloppy joes for supper, they didn't taste good because your mom was mad. Miss Hutter stood there at a big cafeteria window spying on us, so we decided not to bother snowing the girls, but just to make plans of our own. Nick herded the boys over to a corner near the spit pit. As we passed, I glanced over the rail and noticed that it didn't look half bad, all piled up with clean snow. But everybody knew what was underneath, so the white icing didn't fool us for a minute. It was like a coat of paint over a bicycle held together by rust. I looked over to see how Miss Ivanovich was surviving. She'd put on a purple down coat and fuzzy black boots, but she had nothing over her ears to keep her from hearing us talk if the wind was right. Her back was tight against the brick wall, and her arms were crossed to keep in the warmth. While she didn't look ready to kick up her heels with happiness, there weren't any big fat tears freezing on her cheeks either. I wondered if she still loved little children. "How do we know?" Rolf asked as we got into a football huddle. "How do we know who sinks her? I mean, what if it was right now that she started bawling?" "I think," Nick said, thinking, "that it goes to the ones who did the last thing before she gives up. Right now," he sighed, "the girls would probably win." "Yeah," I said, staring down into the pit, imagining things under the snow like frozen wads of Hubba Bubba, scrunched up test papers with C minus written on them, and hibernating fungus. Then we all stared at Svetlana to see if she could take 14 eyes looking at once. When she felt our whammy, she moved around the corner closer to the jet slide. Maybe she thought she was safer near the girls. Maybe she decided it was us who'd changed her name to Svetlana I've got an itch. No matter how hard we tried, we couldn't think of anything that good ourselves. Marshall still needed to finish our fleet of planes, and Nick and I would buy a bag of rubber bands after school. But that was for tomorrow, and tomorrow might be too late. For a while we tried just kicking the ball, but like our ideas, it kept sinking into the snow. Marshall and RX raced around, making fresh tracks and tackling each other in the drifts. Still, nobody came up with anything else spectacular to do this to the sub, and it was only 11 o'clock, with almost the whole day left. "Hey, how about watches?" Trevor asked suddenly. He was lying flat on the ground, flapping his arms and legs, making a snow angel. "Everybody wearing one?" Everybody wasn't. "Look, wear them tomorrow," he said as we gathered over him and watched him finish his wide-winged angel. We all had watches alike because of a sale at Dominic's, the big supermarket on Green Bay Road. Actually, it wasn't as much a sale as a special deal. Your family was supposed to save $300 worth of the pink cash register slips they gave out from October through December. The whole thing was to make you shop there, but if you did and saved the pink receipts, you could buy a digital watch with an alarm for just $8.99. It was such a great deal that almost every boy in fourth grade got one for Christmas or Hanukkah. When you're in the fourth grade, you start feeling a little weird wearing the Star Wars watch your grandmother gave you when you were just learning to tell time. So you hide it in the junk under the bed or in the back of the drawer with the seashells. Then you tell your folks you lost it at the swimming pool or something, but you don't throw it away because it will be good to take apart on a dull day. Anyway, most guys came back after winter vacation with a new Dominic special with an extra hole poked in the black plastic band to make it small enough. If you don't have one, borrow one from somebody, Trevor said. Then we all set them to go off at, I don't know, 10:13 tomorrow morning. He got up and shook himself clean. What do you think? By then she ought to be pretty much worn down. Maybe that'll be the end of it. Marshall, who was being very, very careful not to say a word, patted Trevor on the head like he thought old Trev was a terrific sub-sinker. Actually, though, nobody expected a chorus of 7 alarm beepers to make anyone get hysterical, but it did sound like fun. We could synchronize them like spies do on television. That's all the plans we had. Time to go in, Miss Ivanovich called, and we dashed to the door. I had the feeling if we didn't go in soon, the storm would bury us like old bubble gum. The girls came running from their shelter, hopping through drifts, scraping at snow with their mittens. Miss Ivanovich stood at the door, waiting. Now I want you to go to tiptoe quietly up the stairs, children, she said. Miss Hutter mentioned to me that you were a little bit too rowdy on the way out. I know you don't want to disturb the other boys and girls who are working, so let's all keep our lips locked. She turned an imaginary key in her mouth, took it out, and flung it toward the playground. Once her hand was free of the let's pretend key, she reached to open the door. But before she'd budged it an inch, the girls let her have it. Zap, pow, slam, sucko. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 snowballs smacked her from behind, or got the door she was pulling at. Only 9. Some girl hadn't thrown one. Unfortunately, Miss Hutter was not at any window. If all the girls got sent home, they would have had to forfeit. But nobody was there to send them home. Nobody stood there but Miss I've got an itch. Her lips still locked tight, and the only key lying in the drift. She leaned over, scooped up a huge wad of snow, and letting the ball warm in her bare hands, packed it tight. When it was just the way she wanted it, she tossed it straight up about a foot, caught it, and eyed us to make sure we were watching close. Then, without a word, she wound up and smashed that snowball flat on the nose of the jet slide. Giving us a little half smile, she turned around, opened the door, and went inside. The kids in 4A, who'd been with their sub building a snowman on the far side of the playground, were on their way in too. They saw the shot and whistled. We didn't whistle because our jaws were hanging open. Inside, we slowly hung our coats up in our lockers and stamped up the stairs to our room, our fingers and noses and toes still red and cold. As we thawed, we settled in for the next round. It began to occur to me that it wasn't just boys against girls anymore. The sub was in it too. The writing on the board was gone, both her name and our score. Even Mr. Starr's math assignments left over from the day before had been erased. She must have decided that to start out with a clean slate before she came down to recess. After she'd cleaned it, though, she'd drawn a picture with bright yellow chalk, a 3-foot smiley face that had a grin from one circle eye to the other. Below the face, down near the chalk tray, she'd written, "Have a nice day." Nobody smiled back at the face but her. We were not having a nice day and didn't want her telling us to. Marching up to the front of the room, she sat on Mr. Starr's desk again to start over, full of confidence, fresh from her bullseye. Her grin, though, like the one on the smiley face, was too wide, and she started off with a laugh that was too loud. "Well," she said, chuckling, "I guess you really put 1 or 2 over on me this morning." She swung her feet from side to side and chewed on her bottom lip a minute before finally explaining. "I guess you got away with what you did because I did my student teaching with kindergartners, and their regular teacher was there with me all the time. So I just didn't know about 4th graders. I mean, those 5-year-olds were just so cute and cuddly. Oh, you're cute too, of course, but you're also very, very funny, I guess." And the strange chuckle came again. What I didn't realize is that fourth graders have such a terrific sense of humor. She beamed her appreciation of our humor. It must have been hard smiling that wide at 17 straight faces. Molly's was totally sour. She for sure didn't like Miss Ivanovich, fake laughing at things she thought were surefire subsinkers. I noticed that Miss Ivanovich wasn't going Gucci goo any longer. She was trying to talk to us now like we were buddies who had managed to pull a good practical joke on her. She smiled warmly. Aretha smiled back. I wondered if she was the one who hadn't thrown a snowball. Well, Miss Ivanovich said finally, now that you know that I know, maybe we can just be friends. What do you say? There was a long silence, and then Nick spoke up. I say that we're 5 minutes late for music class, and Mrs. Franchini won't like it one bit. Miss Ivanovich was getting smarter. Before believing him, she checked the schedule on Mr. Starr's desk. It did say music at 11:15 on Thursday, but that's all it said. Where do you go for music? She asked. The girls already had a plan. Molly and Lisa stood up, linked arms, and led the whole class the longest way possible to the music room. Aretha walked with Miss Ivanovich, but I could see from the way the girls looked at her that she'd be afraid to tell. First we tromped all the way to the other end of the school on the second floor, past the resource center and the third grades, stopping at fountains on the way to get drinks, and then down the stairs by the sixth grade rooms, and all the way back the whole length of the school again. RX and I stopped at the gym to watch the little kids play. They were using the parachute. The whole class was gathered around the edge of this humongous real parachute. The gym teacher, Miss Lucid, was calling out, "Lift!" The little kids raised it up, flapping their arms. The air gathered underneath so the parachute puffed out like a huge dome, then practically picked them up off their feet. When it had mushroomed out at its biggest, every second kid around the edge let go and ran like mad underneath, looking for a new place to hold on before the parachute collapsed on the floor. They were having a great time. Then we strolled past the LD room and the second grades before we got to the music room, which was just next to the cafeteria on the first floor. When we finally made it, our music teacher, Mrs. Franchini, said, "I'd about given up on you." And Molly told her with a sigh, "We got started late. We got a substitute teacher today who's never even been in this school before." Heading back to her seat, she said, "She doesn't know much." Mrs. Franchini gave her a warning frown. Out in the hall, Miss Ivanovich heard Molly and flinched. I was standing next to her. "You don't have to go in with us," I told her. "Mr. Starr never does, but you're supposed to come back for us at noon." She didn't believe me, as she walked right past, and she walked right in behind the class like a Russian princess just back from a windy sleigh ride. She was still wearing her fuzzy brown black outside boots. "You don't have to stay," Mrs. Franchini said kindly. "Just come back in half an hour." She took Miss Ivanovich's arm and led her toward the door. "Stop in at the teacher's lounge, room 115, and get a cup of coffee. You look as though you might need a rest." Miss Ivanovich smiled first at her and then at me. Right then I think she decided I was a truth teller and a friend. "Thank you, Hobie, my dear," she said. As Miss Ivanovich turned away, I heard Mrs. Franchini say, "Nicholas Rossi, it's time to start singing and stop talking, or I'll make mostaccioli out of you, head to toes." Nick grinned. Both of them have Italian names, and she's always teasing him like that. "With Parmesan cheese," he told her, as if what he meant was, "Certainly, Miss Franchini." "All right, then," she said, sitting down at the piano, and we started right off with two songs we were going to do for the fourth grade sing in March. First, "I Can Sing a Rainbow," and then one that is funnier than its name, "Be Kind to Your Parents." I knew my mom and dad would for sure like the part where it goes, "Remember they're grown-ups, a difficult stage of life. They're apt to be nervous and overexcited, confused from the daily storm and strife. Just keep in mind, though, it sounds odd, I know, most parents were children long ago. Incredible." My mouth was wide open, shouting "Incredible!" when I glanced out the door and saw Miss Ivanovich standing there, not as hidden as she thought. She was listening, maybe to the singing. Probably not, though, because we weren't all that good yet. I think she was listening to how it was done. In Mrs. Franchini's class, nobody was scraping chairs or crawling on the floor or scribbling on the chalkboard. I believe she wanted to learn how to make us into good little children. Just as I was looking, she peeked around the corner, laughed when she saw me, and waved with both hands like she did when we left with the cafeteria count. I had the sinking feeling that I was fast on my way to being Hobie, my dear, the substitute teacher's pet. When the time came to leave, she was still around the corner, waiting, and she led us the short way, back up the fourth grade steps. Molly joined Nick and me, a smirk on her face. She may talk big and know how to throw a handful of snow, but I think she's scared, she said, walking backward down the hall in front of us. I hope you guys were over there spitting into the pit at recess to make it more gross, because it's going to be all yours from now on. We've scored whole lot more points than you have. Ha! I answered. Ha! Ha! That's what you think. Points don't even matter. It's the final flood that counts, Nick told her. You know, Molly said, my grandmother told my mother about Mr. Starr practically barfing in class, and my grandmother says she anticipates that we will all be sick by tomorrow. She said Mr. Starr was all germy and that he had no business at all being in school yesterday. I've heard, I told her. It's the Shanghai flu that's going around. I think your grandmother brought it back in her box, in that box of stuff. I think there are Shanghai flu germs all over her Chinese cricket cage. I think it's not empty at all. I think it's filled with billions of million-legged, bug-eyed germs. If you want to know what I think that because you brought your grandmother's germy stuff to school, the flu is your fault. Molly tossed her hair and raced up the stairs ahead of us. At the top she turned around and said, I am rubber and you are glue. Whatever you say bounces off me. It sticks to you. Stuck out her tongue and disappeared into the room. She is definitely not Coochie. She is oostic, a dwarf, and a squird, and we can't let her win, Nick said. He was right. Chapter 7. The Fanged Face. The sign on the principal's office read in. That didn't mean Miss Hutter was in. That meant we were. The sign had a picture on it of a fat gray cloud with a mean eye and O-shaped lips blowing out a mouthful of stormy weather. We were staying in because by lunchtime the snow had gotten so deep, or the temperature so low, or the wind so wild that she was afraid she'd lose a kid or two if she let us out. We were sorry. Out days are better. After we ate our hot dogs and jello in the cafeteria, we had to go into the auditorium to watch movies. Nick and Rolf and I sat together, but we didn't watch too close. One movie was on the life cycle of the monarch butterfly. The other one was about sharks. Nothing but leaves and little fishes got eaten up in either movie. I'd have given each one about half a star. The auditorium was hot and most kids were dressed for cold, so the whole place smelled like wet boots and damp hair. By the time the first bell rang, we were pretty much zonked out by the dark and the steam heat, but we slogged back upstairs anyway, ready to give subsicking another try. People had been talking about it all through lunch, thinking of things they wanted to do, remembering stuff their brothers and sisters and even parents had told them they'd done. So when we got to the room, everybody's plans started rolling right away. The line at the pencil sharpener had at least 5 girls in it. At 1:18, all the boys dropped their math books flat on the floor. They made a giant smack, and a few people jumped. Unfortunately, though, Miss Ivanovich was in the hall at the time, trying to reel in the kids who were out there talking. The girls started raising their hands to go to the washroom just as Rolf let a handful of paper clips slip through the slits in the radiator under the window. For a good 20 minutes those clips rattled and pinged like hail on a metal roof. The place was so up for grabs that Molly wasn't even adding anything to what she'd decided the score was. But somehow on the way to the pencil sharpener she did manage to detour past the chalkboard slow enough to grab a piece of red chalk and draw on the huge smiley face a pair of mountain-shaped eyebrows that met in the middle like Miss Ivanovich's. And on the way back from turning her pencil into shavings for the 13th time, she added 2 long red fangs to the smile. Marshall wasn't making any noise. He sat at his work, happy as a pigeon on a ledge, stuffing his desk with new paper airplanes and making an occasional bird. When Miss Ivanovich passed his chair, he gave her a crane folded out of blue paper, which she stuck in her thick hair. It perched there like it was sitting on a black nest. Class, she announced, I have found Mr. Starr's lessons plans. They were right in the top drawer. She shuffled through the papers. It's a little late to start the new unit in social studies, so we'll begin local government tomorrow. RX, standing back by the sink, groaned. Instead, we'll forge right on to math. The assignment sheet says that you are to do pages 89 and 90 in your math workbooks. The girls at the pencil sharpener couldn't hear her, so she had to repeat it. I want those pages on Mr. Starr's desk today so I can correct them before he gets back. I suggest you take out your workbooks and start on them right now. She waited, and when the talking stopped, she added, or else. Or else what? Rolf asked. and we all listened for the answer. My dad always says not to make threats you can't deliver on. For a second Miss Ivanovich's face had the same panicked look our cat Fido gets when somebody turns on the vacuum cleaner. He doesn't know whether to run or attack. Finally she shrugged and said, "Or else Mr. Starr won't get them." It wasn't easy to argue with that. But then I thought, after all, we got out of both language arts and science in the morning just by fooling around. Might as well go ahead and do the math. We'd have to sooner or later anyway. "But Mr. Starr hasn't taught us how to do any of this," RX complained. "We don't even know what these problems are all about. I think you must have got the page numbers wrong." She looked over the assignment. "You mean you're in fourth grade and you don't know how to do simple multiplication?" I don't believe it. She for sure had stopped thinking we didn't know 2 plus 2. Now she had us ready for algebra. Staring over my shoulder, she saw that I'd already finished 2 problems. I should have covered them with my hand. "Hobie's doing the work," she said in triumph, and RX looked daggers at me. "Perhaps when he is finished he can help you." Miss Ivanovich gave me an encouraging smile, but as she checked over my math I noticed that her eyes kept wandering to my T-shirt. Maybe, I thought, she feels sorry for me. Maybe I ought to explain about the melted crayons in the dryer so she won't think my clothes are too weird. Nick, workbook in hand to ask a stupid question, was standing next to us. He had noticed her looking at my shirt, too. "I can see you like Hobie's shirt, Miss Ivanovich," he said. "Did you know that Hobie's mother is an artist?" I gagged a little because my mother is about as much an artist as Fido is. She's a physical therapist and helps people who are just getting over strokes and car accidents and things. She can hardly even draw smiley faces. "Maybe you've heard of her," he went on. "Mrs. Hanson is her name. She makes these fantastic designer T-shirts and jeans like you see on TV, and Hobie here wears them almost every day to school as advertisements. She uses mostly red colors, you'll notice. That's her trademark." Miss Ivanovich wasn't going to let him put anything over on her. "Did your mother really do this?" she asked me, barely disguising the fact that she thought the shirt looked disgusting. "Yes," I said, telling the truth. "She did it last October." "It's not signed, though, is it, Hobie?" Nick asked, pulling back my shirt and peering in at the neck label. "No," I said, "this one's not signed." "He has some underwear in the same pattern." "That's not signed either," I told her. "I expect you'd like Hobie's mother to make you one or two. They're pretty expensive, though, close to $100. Maybe you could pay in installments." "Miss Ivanovich," Lisa called out. Rolf had moved over to an empty desk next to Lisa's and was chewing on the tail of his pink plastic ballpoint fish, swinging his untied gym shoes back and forth. He kicked the bottom of Lisa's desk with each swing. "Miss Ivanovich," Lisa called again, waving her hand in the air urgently. "Yes, Molly." Several girls giggled, and how incredibly dumb you'd have to be to still not know that Lisa wasn't Molly. "Butzenreuter is kicking my desk." "I am not." He banged her chair again for telling. "You are, too." He stopped kicking. "I am not." "You were." "Who says?" "I say." "Well, who do you think you are, the Princess and the Pea?" Using the soles of both her feet, she shoved his desk about a foot away. "Children, you mustn't fight," Miss Ivanovich warned. But she didn't say, "or else." Rolf started swinging his fish pin toward Lisa like it might scribble zigzags on her neck. "Dwerp! Squird! Ratchet!" Lisa yelled, swatting at her workbook at him. "Lisa!" Molly hissed. "Cut it out. It's a trap. He started it. It's his point." I think he was just kicking myself, but if she wanted to turn it into a point for us, that was all right with me. Lisa clenched her jaws, gave Rolf a double evil eye, and bashed him on the head with her workbook. "Lisa!" Molly warned. Miss Ivanovich suddenly did not look upset by the fight at all. Instead, she stared steadily at Molly with just a flicker of a smile. Molly glanced up at her and gulped, like she'd just swallowed a live fly. Miss Ivanovich said nothing at all, but just moved to the other side of the room to try to coach Marshall, who didn't speak English, into doing the part of the math that didn't need any. I leaned over to Molly and said, "I'm pretty sure she heard you when you called Lisa, Lisa." "You think so?" she whispered back. Then she shrugged her shoulders and smiled. "If she heard me, why didn't she say something about it? I would have." She wrote a quick note, which she passed back to Michelle, who raised her hand and asked Miss Ivanovich if she would please help her with a story problem. Miss Ivanovich left wide-eyed Marshall and turned to her. "Let's see now. This doesn't look hard at all. 4 classes are going on a field trip to the Nature Center," Miss Ivanovich read out loud. "If there are 28 children in one class and 29 in the other three. How? Shh, please. I'm trying to concentrate, Jenny complained. What she was really trying to do, it seemed to me, was multiply using a pencil that by now was only about an inch long. While the sub had her back turned, explaining about the number of kids on the field trip, Molly was at the board again. Girls 5, she wrote, boys 4, though I couldn't for the life of me figure out where she got those numbers. She was just trying to scare us, but it didn't work on me. Confucius say, phony numbers don't squeeze out real tears. RX and Trevor got up, stretched, ambled over to the sink, and started to wash their hands. The math must have gotten them dirty. When Miss Ivanovich announced finally that it was gym time, she looked to the front of the room and saw the new score, as well as the red-fanged and eyebrowed face. She didn't look anywhere close to tears about it, though. Instead, she walked straight up to the chalkboard, and just when I guessed she was going to erase the whole thing, she picked up the yellow chalk and drew a pair of earrings with bells on the ends where the face's ears would be. Then, after smiling back at Molly, she added to the scoreboard, sub 2. Those numbers I could figure. Her first was the snowball. What the second one was, Molly and I both knew.